The desert stretched for endless miles, a sea of golden sand under a pale sky. Heat shimmered in waves, making the horizon blur and twist. The colony world was young, its settlements small and scattered. Most of the land was unexplored, left untouched by the settlers who lived in safer valleys near water. But for survey teams, the emptiness of the desert was an open book, waiting to be rid. Dan wiped the sweat from his brow as he stood on the ridge of a sand dune. The wind was hot, carrying fine dust that stung his face. Behind him, the rest of his team climbed slowly, their packs heavy with scanners and supplies. Dan was the leader of this survey group. He was not the oldest, but he carried a stubborn confidence that made others follow him. Where most saw nothing but risk, Dan saw promise. "Anything yet?" called Mira, one of the younger surveyors, her face red from the climb. Dan adjusted the scanner in his hand. The device hummed faintly, its small screen filled with shifting lines. "Something's here," he said. "The ground below us isn't solid sand. There's structure, something artificial." The others gathered around, curious and uneasy. The desert had its share of strange finds, ruins, old wrecks, half-buried artifacts from races that had passed through long before humans. But this reading was different. The lines on the scanner bent unnaturally, suggesting something huge and deep beneath the surface. "Could be another wreck," Myra said, breathing hard. Dan shook his head. "No ship is that size. This is something else." The team followed as Dan led them down the far side of the dune. The sand there sloped into a hollow, and at the bottom, something dark jutted out of the ground. At first it looked like stone, but as they drew closer, the truth became clear. A wall of smooth black material rose from the sand, wide and tall, as if it continued far below the surface. It was not weathered like rock. It was too perfect, its surface so polished that the sun's light reflected in sharp streaks. Faint lines ran across it, forming a pattern that pulsed softly, as though the wall itself was alive. The group stopped at the edge of the hollow. For a moment, no one spoke. The desert was silent, except for the wind. The air seemed heavier here, thicker, as if the very ground was holding its breath. Mira took a step back. "I don't like this, Dan. It feels wrong." Another surveyor, Tomas, crouched and brushed sand from the base of the wall. His fingers tapped against it. "It's not metal," he said. "Not stone either. I don't know what this is." Dan crouched beside him. His hand touched the wall, and at once he felt a faint vibration, like the heartbeat of some giant creature slumbering far below. He pulled back, startled, but his eyes shone with wonder. "This isn't just a ruin," he said softly. "This is a tomb or a vault. Something built it and buried it here." The others exchanged uneasy glances. To most colonists, the desert was dangerous enough without hidden mysteries. But Dan's excitement was hard to ignore. His voice carried that spark of belief that made the impossible seem worth chasing. "Why bury it out here?" Mira asked. "Why hide something in the middle of nowhere?" "Because they didn't want it to be found," Tomas muttered. The team fell quiet at that thought. The desert wind howled, kicking sand across their boots. Dan rose to his feet. His eyes scanned the horizon, then returned to the black wall. "Whatever this is, it's old. Maybe older than any colony on this world. If we're the first to find it, then we carry the responsibility to uncover it. Humanity is here to learn, not to run from shadows." Myra frowned. "Sometimes shadows hide things for a reason." But Dan only smiled faintly. He could feel the pull of the structure, as if it was waiting for him, calling from beneath the sand. The rest of the day, the team worked to uncover more of the wall. They dug with tools and cleared sand with machines, revealing more of the black surface. It stretched farther than they expected, forming an angle like a corner. This was no small fragment. It was part of something vast, buried deep under the desert dot. By the time the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, the team had revealed enough to see a set of markings near the base. Strange symbols glowed faintly, arranged in lines. They were not any language the humans knew. The sight filled Myra with dread. She wanted to leave, to return to camp, and forget what they had seen. But Dan stood before the symbols, his shadow, long across the black wall, and felt only determination. "This is history," he said quietly, "and it's ours to uncover." As night fell and stars spread across the sky, the wall pulsed softly with its strange light. The desert seemed to lean in around them, as if listening. The tomb of endless night had been found, and it had been waiting. Morning came with a pale light across the desert. The black wall, now partly uncovered, gleamed faintly as if it drank the sun instead of reflecting it. The survey team rose from their tents, tired but restless. None of them had slept well. The strange hum in the ground had followed them through the night, like a low whisper under the sand. Dan stood near the wall, running his fingers across the glowing symbols. They pulsed slowly, as if alive. He had recorded them on his scanner, but the device gave no translation. It listed the script as unknown, unclassified. To Dan, that only made it more exciting. Behind him, Mira approached, her face pale. "We should report this," she said firmly. "Let the colony leaders send experts. This isn't our job." Dan turned, his eyes steady. "If we leave, someone else will claim it. We found it. We open it." Myra shook her head. "You don't understand. Last night I dreamed of the wall. I saw darkness spilling from it. It felt endless." Before Dan could answer, a shadow crossed the ridge of the dune. A tall figure walked down with slow, graceful steps. Her skin was pale silver, her robe marked with flowing lines of blue. It was Vera, an alien scholar who had traveled with caravans across the desert. She was not part of the survey team, but she had seen their lights during the night and had come to investigate. Vera stopped when her eyes fell on the black wall. Her calm face turned sharp with fear. "You must stop this," she said at once. Her voice trembled, though she tried to keep it firm. Thomas frowned. "Do you know what this is?" Vera nodded slowly. "Among my people, it has a name. We call it the Tomb of Endless Night. It was sealed long ago by races far older than mine. It is not meant to be opened." Dan stepped forward, curious. "A tomb? For what?" Vera's gaze fixed on the glowing symbols. "Not for what. For who? A prisoner sleeps here, a being of shadows. Long ago, it tried to devour the light of stars. Many fought against it. They could not destroy it, only bind it. They built this prison and left it buried where no one should walk." The team fell silent. The desert wind hissed between them. Myra's fear deepened, but Dan only looked more intrigued. "If that's true," he said, "then this is the greatest find of our time. Proof of ancient war, proof of a power so great it scared whole civilizations. We cannot walk away." Vera's silver eyes narrowed. "You think discovery is worth the price? My people tell stories of this place, so our children know to avoid it. You are human, new among the stars, yet you rush toward danger as if it were a game." Dan did not flinch. "Maybe that is what makes us different. Others ran from this thing, buried it, and tried to forget. But humans do not fear the dark. We study it. We face it." Mira grabbed his arm. "Dan, listen to her. We don't need to be heroes. We need to live." Dan's voice softened. "Myra, we came here to learn. If we turn back now, we dishonor that. If this is a prison, then we must understand it, so history does not repeat. Maybe humans are the ones who can look at what others fear." Vera's lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped closer to the wall, but would not touch it. Her hands shook slightly as she traced the air above the symbols. These marks are warnings. They say the night inside never ends. They say the seal is not to be broken. Tomas whispered, and yet it still glows after all this time. How strong is something that endures for ages? Dan placed a hand on the wall again. The vibration was stronger now, more insistent. His pulse seemed to fall in rhythm with it. For a moment, he felt as if something deep inside the wall was listening. To him, waiting. He pulled back and looked at his team. We are not breaking anything yet. We are learning. We map it, we record it, we test it, step by step. If this place holds danger, we must know what kind, not leave it buried for another team to stumble upon years later. Myra wanted to argue, but she saw on his face the same unshakable determination she had seen many times before. Once Dan fixed his mind on something, he never turned aside. Vera sighed heavily. Then I will stay. If you humans are foolish enough to touch this place, then I will at least stand here to warn you when you go too far. Dan gave a small nod. Good. Then we face it together. The sun rose higher, heating the sand until it burned under their boots. The team worked to uncover more of the buried structure. The wall stretched farther, revealing another corner. Slowly, the shape of a doorway emerged, sealed tight by the same smooth black material. When Dan saw it, his chest tightened with excitement. Away inside, he could feel it waiting. The tomb of endless night had kept its secrets for ages. But now, under the stubborn will of humans, it was being revealed. The warnings had been spoken, but Dan's mind was set. The doorway would not stay sealed forever. The desert sun fell lower as the team uncovered more of the black structure. Sand poured away under their digging, revealing a tall, arched doorway sealed with a smooth surface that looked like glass but felt harder than steel. Strange lines ran across it, glowing faintly like veins of blue fire. It was beautiful and frightening at the same time. Dan stood before it, staring with wide eyes. His heart raced with every uncovered symbol. This was no ruin of broken stones or scattered relics. This was whole, untouched, and waiting. The tomb of endless night was not dead. It was alive. Myra paced behind him, arms crossed tightly. It feels wrong, she muttered. Every shovel of sand we move, it feels heavier, like the air is pressing down on us. Tomas wiped sweat from his brow. I feel it too. Like something knows we're here. Vera stood a short distance away, her silver eyes fixed on the doorway. She had not touched the wall once. Her voice was low, filled with weight. You are waking it. Dan turned sharply. It has been asleep for ages. If it can be woken, then it means it was never truly gone. Don't you see? If this thing inside was strong enough to frighten whole races, then we cannot pretend it does not exist. Humanity cannot close its eyes. Vera met his gaze without blinking. And what if by opening this door you free the very darkness they fought to contain? You think you carry courage, but perhaps you carry only pride. Dan felt the pull of her words but would not admit doubt. He touched the sealed doorway, and again the faint vibration ran up his arm. He could almost hear a whisper in the back of his mind, soft as wind in a cave. The team set up lights around the hollow, their beams cutting through the shadows as night fell. The desert grew cold quickly, the warmth of day fleeing into the clear, star-filled sky. The black wall gleamed under the lights, its glowing lines pulsing more brightly now as if responding to their presence. Mira shivered. It's brighter than before. It's watching us. Dan turned to his scanner, setting it against the surface of the doorway. The machine beeped and hummed, but its results were confused, as if the wall was not truly solid. The readings shifted between dense metal and empty space, as if both existed at once. This is impossible, Tomas muttered, leaning over his shoulder. It says the wall is thicker than a mountain, but also thinner than paper. It can't be both. Dan felt a chill run through him, but he forced his voice steady. It means the builders use something beyond our science. That makes this more important, not less. Hours passed as they studied the doorway. The glowing symbols seemed to react to their tools, pulsing faster when touched with metal probes. At times, Dan thought he heard faint echoes within the wall itself, like footsteps, or a distant breath dotted lost. Tomas stepped back, uneasy. We should stop. If this is a prison, then poking at the door is asking for trouble. Myra nodded quickly. We don't even know what's behind it. We could release poison or radiation, or worse. Dan's jaw tightened. He looked at them. One by one. You're afraid. I understand. But think of what this means. Humanity has always grown by stepping where no one else would step. We crossed seas, we climbed mountains, we walked into the void of space. And here, in this desert, we face the next step. If we do nothing, we are no better than those who buried it and fled. The team fell silent. His words carried a fire they could not easily put out. Even Myra lowered her gaze, though her fear did not leave her eyes. Vera's voice broke the quiet. If you go further, you must understand the cost. This is not like climbing a mountain. Mountains do not look back. This place does. Dan said nothing. His hand rested on the black surface, and for a brief moment, he felt the hum of the wall answer his heartbeat, matching its rhythm. He almost believed the tomb was alive, waiting for him alone. As the night deepened, the desert grew silent. No wind moved. The stars above seemed sharper, colder. The team gathered around the doorway, unsure what would happen next. Then it came. A faint sound, like a sigh, rose from the sealed wall. The glowing symbols flared brighter, filling the hollow with pale light. Sand shifted at their feet, sliding as though the ground trembled beneath. Mira gasped. It's moving. Slowly, the doorway began to change. Lines of light spread outward like cracks, forming patterns that shimmered across the surface. The sealed wall thinned before their eyes, turning transparent. Beyond it, shadows swirled in a vast chamber, endless and deep. Dan's breath caught. This was it, the way inside. But as he stared into the shifting dark beyond the doorway, a cold thought pressed into his mind. It was not his own thought. It was a whisper, soft and slow, curling in his chest. At last, Dan staggered back, his heart pounding. His eyes darted to the others, but no one else seemed to hear. The tomb of endless night was no longer sleeping. It had begun to open. The air inside the hollow grew heavy as the black doorway thinned to glass. Beyond it lay nothing but swirling darkness, a vast emptiness that seemed alive. The survey lights flickered, shadows stretching longer than they should. Each person felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from beyond the wall. Dan stood at the front, his hand hovering just above the surface. His breath was quick, but his eyes burned with determination. He had dreamed of finding something that would change humanity's place in the stars. This was it. Behind him, Mira whispered, "Don't do it." Her voice cracked. "Please, Dan. It's not meant to be touched." Tomas muttered, "It's like it's waiting for him." And then Vera spoke. Her tone was sharper than before. "Do not let it sense you. It has no mercy. If you let it touch your mind, you will not be yours anymore." Dan swallowed hard, but he did not step away. His curiosity was stronger than fear. He pressed his palm against the thin wall. At once, the glow surged. Light rushed through the lines of the symbols, flaring like lightning across the surface. The ground shuddered, sending sand pouring into the hollow. The doorway melted into nothing, leaving only open air where solid black had been. Darkness spilled. Not like smoke, not like fog, but something thicker. It coiled and moved as if it had weight. The lights around the camp flickered again, dimming as though the shadows drank their energy. Myra screamed, stumbling back. Tomas raised a tool, and shaking hands though it was no weapon, Dan did not move. He heard a voice, not with his ears, but inside his mind. A deep, slow sound, heavy with age. The spark returns. The living flame, his chest tightened. The words were not human, yet he understood them perfectly. The others did not react, proving they heard nothing. Only Dan. What are you? He whispered aloud, his voice shaking. The darkness rippled as if amused. I am the night that has no end. I am the silence between stars. They feared me. They caged me. But you are different. You are the spark I waited for. Dan staggered, clutching his head. The voice was too heavy, pressing against his thoughts. He felt as though it would crush him, but at the same time, it pulled him closer, like a tide pulling a ship. Myra grabbed his arm. Dan, what is happening? He looked at her, wide-eyed, but could not explain. The words filled him, drowning out everything else. Vera stepped forward, her silver eyes flashing with fury. She raised her hands, chanting in her own language. Her voice rose like a song, sharp and strong, cutting through the hum. The darkness recoiled slightly, its edges hissing. Back! She shouted to Dan. Do not answer it. Every word you give it, every thought you let it touch, gives it strength. Dan's heart pounded. He tried to step away, but the shadows clung to his hand, wrapping around his fingers like cold smoke. His veins burned with ice. He felt both terrified and strangely calm, as though the darkness promised something only he could receive. You are mine, the voice whispered. You are the door they could not close. The walls of the hollow shook. Sand poured down in streams. The team stumbled, trying to keep their footing. Lights sparked and went out, one by one. Only the glow of the black wall remained, pulsing in rhythm. With the beating of Dan's heart, Myra cried out, pulling at him with all her strength. Dan, fight it! He clenched his teeth, forcing his hand free. The shadows hissed as they tore away from his skin. He fell to his knees, gasping. The darkness swirled angrily in front of the open doorway. Shapes formed within it, tall and shifting, like towers or wings or claws, but never clear. It was as though it could not decide what it wanted to be. Vera's voice steadied as she chanted louder. Her song pressed against the shadows, holding them at the edge of the doorway. But she was sweating, her body trembling. I cannot hold it forever, she said through gritted teeth. Dan forced himself to his feet. His body ached, his hands still cold from the touch. But in his chest, he felt something else. The voice had called him Spark. It had waited for him. Why? Why only him? He stepped forward again, ignoring Myra's cry of protest. He stared into the endless shadow, his jaw set. You want me, he said, his voice shaking but firm. Then hear this. I am not yours. I am human, and I do not kneel. The shadow shuddered. The voice inside his mind paused, then laughed, a sound like breaking stone. Human, yes. You are not like them. You will break, but not yet. I will test you first. The chamber roared with a wave of darkness that slammed against the hollow walls. The team fell to the ground, shielding their faces from flying sand. Lights shattered. The night swallowed everything. And in the blackness, Dan stood alone, the cold voice echoing inside him. The tomb was no longer a prison. It was awake. The desert was silent, but inside the hollow the world seemed broken. The doorway no longer held a wall. It was a wound in the earth, spilling shadows that twisted like smoke yet felt heavy as stone. The team huddled near the sand piles, their lights dead, their voices hushed. Only the faint glow of the strange symbols lit their faces, pale with fear. Dan stood at the edge of the dark opening. The voice still echoed in his mind. deep and slow, each word dragging across his thoughts. He clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. The others could not hear it. This thing was speaking only to him. Vera rose, brushing sand from her silver robe. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. Now you know why my people feared this place. That is no ruin. It is no treasure. It is the endless night. Mira grabbed Dan's arm. She's right. We need to seal it, bury it again. Call for help, anything but stand here. But Dan shook his head. Help from who? This thing is older than all of us. If it was strong enough to scare whole races, then no one has the power to deal with it now. That's why they left it buried. Tomas rubbed his temples. Then why does it want you, Dan? Why speak only to you? Dan hesitated. The word the voice had used still rang in his chest. Spark. Flame. It called him something more than just human. He did not know why Vera stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Because you are human. Do you not see? This creature has devoured many worlds. It knows every race that stood against it. But humanity was not among them. Your kind was still climbing from the dark of your own world when this prison was made. To it, you are new, unknown. Her words sank deep. Dan thought of Earth, far away, and the long history of struggle. The nights his ancestors had faced without fire. The storms, the hunger, the fear. Maybe she was right. Humans had learned to fight the dark because they had lived inside it for so long. The voice stirred again inside him. Yes, unknown. You, our flame, you are the one thing I could not see. That is why I waited. That is why you are mine. Dan gritted his teeth. I am not yours, he whispered. The shadows in the doorway rippled like water struck by a stone. Mira saw the change and pulled back in fear. It's listening to you. It reacts to your words. Vera nodded, because he is the key. It cannot leave without him. The prison was built to hold it against all it knew, but not against what it did not know. Not against humans. Dan, you must understand your presence is tearing the seal apart. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He had dreamed of discovery, of finding something no one else dared to uncover. Now he wondered if his stubbornness had doomed them all. Thomas spoke quickly, fear sharp in his voice. Then he has to go. If it needs him, then we send him away. Dan, you leave now, you run back across the desert, and maybe it stays trapped. Dan almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. It won't let me go. You felt what happened when I tried to pull away. It follows me inside my mind. If I run, it will follow. The silence that followed was heavier than the desert night. No one had an answer. Finally, Vera spoke again, her voice low. There is more you must know. The endless night feeds on surrender. It grows stronger when minds give up hope, when hearts give in to fear. That is how it devours light by breaking the will of those who carry it. That is why my people could never fight it. We feared too much. Dan felt a strange fire inside his chest. The thought was terrifying, but also clear. That maybe that's why it can't break us. Humans don't let go. We fight even when there's no reason left. We live through fear and keep walking. The voice rumbled inside him, a growl of amusement. We shall see, Spark. We shall see how long your flame burns. Myra covered her ears, though she could not hear what Dan heard. Make it stop, she begged. Dan steadied himself and looked at her. At Tomas, at Vera. Their faces were pale, their bodies shaking. They could barely stand. But he still stood, even with the voice pressing against his thoughts. He realized then that this was what it meant. The endless night could not understand him because he refused to kneel. It was not about strength of body, but about the stubborn fire inside. He looked back at the shadows. You won't break me, he said. Quietly, the ground trembled. The black wall pulsed harder, cracks of light spreading outward. The tomb groaned as if waking fully. Sand cascaded down the hollow's walls. The team scrambled to stay on their feet. Vera shouted above the rumble. "It knows you are its match. That is why it pushes harder. Dan, you must be ready. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine." Dan set his jaw. His whole life, people had told him to be careful, to avoid risk, to walk safe paths. But humanity had never grown by walking safe paths. And now, standing at the edge of the tomb, with the endless night calling him, he understood his place. The truth was clear. The tomb was not just a prison. It was a trial. And humanity had been chosen to face it. The hollow was filled with trembling sand and heavy silence. The black doorway yawned open, spilling shadows that writhed like living smoke. The team huddled together, their faces pale, their hands shaking. Vera tried to keep her calm, whispering quiet chants in her own tongue. But even her voice shook with strain. Dan stood apart, closer to the doorway than the others. His body trembled, but his eyes were steady. Inside his mind, the voice pressed against him again, cold and endless. "Spark. Little flame. You cannot resist forever. Surrender, and I will spare you. Yield, and your suffering ends." Dan clenched his fists. His thoughts were heavy, like trying to walk through water, but he forced words out. "Humans don't surrender." The darkness stirred, swirling faster. All others bent before me. Stars fell into silence. "You will too." Dan took a slow breath. Fear filled him, but something else burned brighter. He thought of Earth, of humanity's long nights. The ancestors who had shivered in caves, fighting beasts with nothing but fire. The explorers who had crossed seas without maps. The settlers who had left their world to walk on other stars. They had faced nights without end before, and always they had endured. Mira called out, her voice breaking. "Dan, don't listen to it." But Dan did listen, and then he answered. His voice rose, steady and strong. "You think fear is enough to break us? You don't understand. We live with fear. We carry it, but we keep walking. That's what makes us human." The air shook. The shadows recoiled as if struck, curling back from his words. For the first time, the voice inside him faltered. Vera's eyes widened. "He resists it," she whispered. "It cannot feed on him." The endless night roared, its sound rolling like thunder across the hollow. "Then I will show you despair." Another way, the shadows poured forward, washing over the ground like a tide. They wrapped around Myra and Tomas, pulling them into a sea of black. Myra cried out, her voice muffled. Tomas swung wildly, but disappeared in the dark. Dan rushed forward, shouting their names. The shadows pressed against him, cold and sharp, but he did not stop. He plunged into the darkness, forcing himself through. For a moment, he could see nothing, hear nothing, feel nothing. His lungs burned as if the night itself stole the air from him. But deep inside, a spark of memory pushed him on. He remembered his first spacewalk, the endless dark around him, the silence of the void. He had been afraid then too, but he had taken one step after another. That memory burned like fire now. He shouted into the dark, "You will not take them. You will not take me." The shadows shivered. His voice tore a crack of light through the darkness, and for a heartbeat, he saw Myra and Tomas, their bodies wrapped but not gone. He grabbed Myra's hand, pulled with all his strength, and dragged her free. Tomas followed, gasping for breath as the shadows ripped away from him. They fell together into the sand. Myra clung to him, trembling, tears running down her face. "I thought it was the end," she whispered. Dan looked back at the swirling dark. His chest heaved, but his eyes held fire. "Not while we stand." The endless night hissed, furious. You are small. You are fragile. Yet you resist. Why? Dan shouted back, his voice echoing across the hollow. Because we are human. We don't fight because we are strong. We fight because we choose to. Even when there's no hope, we fight anyway. The hollow shook again. Sand poured like rivers down the walls. The symbols on the black surface blazed brighter than ever, as if the tomb itself responded to his defiance. Vera stepped forward, her voice filled with awe. It weakens when you defy it. Do you see? It cannot feed on strength. It feeds only on fear. Dan nodded slowly. His legs shook, but he stood tall. Then we give it nothing. We don't kneel. We don't stop. That is how we win. The endless. Night's roar rose higher, shaking the very ground. Then burn. Spark. Burn until nothing remains. The shadow surged again, forming a massive figure in the doorway. Its shape shifted wings, claws, endless teeth, but its core was a towering darkness that reached toward the stars above. It was vast, overwhelming, terrifying. The team stumbled back, but Dan stepped forward. He lifted his chin, his voice steady though his body trembled. Good. I'm not here to kneel. I'm not here to flee. I'm here to stand. The figure loomed, stretching across the sky, but Dan did not look away. His fire, small as it was, burned brighter in that endless night. The tomb shuddered as if caught between breaking apart and holding firm. The test was not over. The true battle was only beginning. The hollow shook as if the desert itself was breaking apart. The shadows rose higher, forming a giant figure that towered over the team. Its body was made of shifting blackness, wings stretching wide, claws reaching toward the stars. The endless night had taken shape at last. Its voice thundered in Dan's mind, heavy as stone. Little flame, you cannot last. All sparks fade. All lights die. You are nothing against me. Dan's chest ached, his body weak from the struggle, but his fire did not dim. He stood firm on the sand, staring up at the giant shadow. Behind him, Myra and Tomas clung together, their faces pale. Vera raised her hands, chanting in her tongue, her voice like a shield holding back part of the dark. But all of them looked to Dan. He realized then that this fight was his. Not because he wanted it, but because the creature had chosen him. And maybe, in some way, the tomb itself had chosen him too. He stepped forward, his voice steady. You. Call me Spark. You think fire is weak because it burns out. But fire is not weak. Fire spreads. Fire grows. Fire lights the way for those lost in darkness. That's what makes us human. The figure shivered, the shadows twisting violently. The ground cracked beneath Dan's boots, but he did not move. He felt the fear pressing against him, cold and endless, but he refused to give it space. Myra shouted, Dan, you'll be killed. He looked back at her and smiled faintly. Maybe, but if I fall, then let it be standing. The endless night roared, swinging down a massive arm of shadow. It crashed into the sand around him, throwing dust into the air. But Dan held his ground. The impact did not crush him. Instead, the shadow's form broke apart where it touched him, as though his defiance burned it away. Vera's voice rose with sudden strength. Do you see? It cannot hold against him. His will breaks it. Dan closed his eyes for a moment, drawing deep on that thought. He thought of his people, of explorers walking into space for the first time, of families surviving through long winters, of children learning to rise again after every fall. Humanity was not strong because of weapons or numbers. Humanity was strong because it never stopped standing, even in endless night. He opened his eyes, fire burning in them. I am human, and I will not be broken, the shadow screamed. The figure collapsed and reformed, clawing at the air. The tomb's walls blazed with light, brighter than any sun. The glowing lines spread across the hollow, cutting into the shadow's body. The endless night's voice grew ragged, shaking the air. What are you? No star burned like this. No mind defied me so. Dan raised his hand, his voice echoing like thunder. I am the spark you feared. I am the fire you could not see. I am human. With those words, the ground erupted. Light poured from the cracks, spreading upward through the shadow. It screamed, twisting, shrinking as the brightness burned through it. The endless night that had devoured stars was torn apart by the smallest flame. Human will refusing to bend. Myra shielded her eyes as the hollow filled with light. Tomas cried out, covering his head. Vera stood tall, her voice joining the rising hum, her chant now filled with power. Together, the light swelled until the shadow's scream broke into silence. When the brilliance faded, the hollow was still. The black doorway was gone. Only shattered stone and glowing dust remained where the tomb had once pulsed with life. The air was calm again. Dan dropped to his knees, breathing hard. His body shook, but he was alive. Mira rushed to him, helping him sit up. You did it, she whispered, tears in her eyes. Thomas stared at the empty space where the shadow had been. That was impossible, but he stood against it. Vera walked slowly to Dan, her face solemn. She bowed her head. No race has ever resisted the endless night. We thought it was beyond all hope. Yet you, a human, broke it. Your kind carries a fire unlike any other. Perhaps this is why you rise so quickly among the stars. You walk into darkness where others will not. Dan looked around at the ruined hollow. The tomb was no longer a prison. It was a grave. The endless night was gone. He rose unsteadily, his hands still trembling, but his eyes steady. He looked at his team, at Vera, at the desert beyond. Then let the night remember us. Humanity will never kneel to it or to anything. The wind swept across the hollow, carrying away the last traces of black dust. Above, the stars shone. Brighter than ever, the tomb of endless night was broken. And for the first time in ages, the desert slept without fear.